In case you don't know, my name is Alan Sircom. I'm the editor of Hi-Fi Plus magazine. I thought what would be a good idea today is to judge the way that we assess music. It's very easy to sit there and say we talk about lots of different types of music, we talk about lots of different things, but why do we use what we use? And it's easy to say that basically what we sit down is, you sit down with a beer and listen to pieces of music, and that's not entirely true. Most of the time it's a mojito. But no, it's also we listen to a variety of pieces of music for specific aspects of performance. This divides into each person's different, and what we're trying to do here is trying to present a range of music that isn't just the ones that we'll play all the time. I do a lot of reviewing, so obviously the same pieces of music keep coming back. There are certain things that I keep playing, but actually what I'm trying to say here is not just that, is that there are pieces of music that work in a kind of more general way that we listen to for specific reasons. And what I've tried to find is examples here. Now the difficulty that we face in doing this is that in many times, for example, if you're listening to a piece of classical music, it's something that might take 10 or 15 minutes to get to the point where we are being critical with it, and the part that actually is the important part for that. So we've tried to find pieces of music where the hit is early in. So we're not going to sit and listen to a 10-minute piece of Mahler, for example. But what we're trying to do is to mix those up, to say there are certain pieces of music that we try and listen to at all times for specific things. And the first one that I'm going to play is, there's a point of where a lot of people say that most music, most assessment of products, especially loudspeakers, can be had through listening to a female voice and a piano. Now, I don't think that's necessarily true. I think there's a lot more that you can get from that, but there's still a lot that you can hear from both of those other things. There was a solo female voice, which is the first thing we'll play, which is a recent track called Soothing by Laura Marling. And what I'd like you to listen for there is for the clarity of the vocal. We're very acutely aware of how the human voice behaves, and doubly so with a woman's voice, because generally they don't have the sort of they call it vocal fries and fricatives that a male voice might have. Even a professional male singer, generally, if you listen to two people, if you listen to a male singer and a female singer, the female's voice tends to be slightly purer. There are exceptions throughout. Billie Holiday was known for her vocal fry in her voice, but in lots of cases it's something that's quite pure. So what I'm suggesting that you listen to here is, yes, you listen to the piece of music as a piece of music, but beyond that, these are basically test discs for us. We listen to that, we assess a piece of equipment in terms of how that vocal articulation, how that detail, how that expressiveness comes across. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this track now.
Oh, my hopeless wonder.
We can assess from this whether a system is good. I'm in a particularly difficult slot here because we're not listening to things that are going to sound bad. These are systems that are going to sound good, and pieces of music are going to resolve that. But it does give you an idea of how we assess certain aspects. Now, moving on from there, I think the next one we should probably look at is solo piano. There's a lot of Beethoven, there's a lot of piano, but it's one of his more moody ones, so it's quite good. But in that respect, what we're listening for there is very much more for a more dynamic range, for more clarity, for more texture. I mean, that's a beautiful piece of music. It's Andras Schiff playing on ECM, so it's a beautifully recorded piece. It's well done. It's a lovely work. But yeah, at this point, we're starting to get an assessment of how a system works, because we've suddenly got that combination of that vocal clarity in the first track We've now got the idea of how it works across a dynamic range and across a wider spectrum, because a piano has actually a very, very wide spectrum of a very wide frequency response. So it gives us an idea of the accuracy of a loudspeaker. So yeah, while I don't hold to this idea that you can tell everything about a loudspeaker with those two tracks, it does, or any system with those two tracks, it does provide quite a lot of information to start with. It gives you a lot to feel. If you're stuck, it's a bit like going to, people going to a guitar shop who don't know how to play that well are always petrified that they don't have anything to play. If you go to a hi-fi store and you want to play something, you don't have many pieces of music, find something with a vocal and a piano like that, and what suddenly you've got is you've assessed a lot of what that system plays. But as I said, not everything. So the next piece I'm going to play, pause, gives you an idea of stereo imagery. But I mean, that's the one thing that we've missed from here. We've got, actually the first track has quite a good set of noises going on around the room. But I think what we have here is we have a piece of music that I've been playing a lot of time. It's a live recording. And it's basically, it's taken literally off the desk from a live recording. It is a 60s soul band who they do one of those slow builds when they put slowly, you add more and more instruments, and what you should be able to hear is each instrument in its own space. So you'll hear the bass guitar here, the drums here, guitar there, and so on. And gradually, as each one comes in, what you should find is that when the horn section comes in, it doesn't suddenly make the guitar move about and everyone's in their place. Now, we could play all 8 minutes of this and it just builds and builds and builds. And at each point in a really good, really resolving system, everyone will be in their place and you can follow out the themes of each musician. We're not going to play that. We're going to play about sort of 4 or 5, a couple of minutes into it. We'll see how it goes. It was one of the last concerts that King Curtis did before tragically he was murdered, which is a horrible story, but sensational piece of. And this is essentially a pickup band made up of some of the finest session musicians from that era that you will ever hear. Bernard Purdie, who invented the Purdie Shuffle, that every funk and jazz guy knows, is still going. Most of them, sadly, are no longer there. But this gives you an idea of that. Going back to the music, what you're hearing is that each instrument, as it builds into this, not only can you hear them, and not only do they have their own physical space, but the rest of it doesn't close down as you add more and more. We could play this, it keeps on going. They add another 5 or 10 instruments in there, and it just keeps mixing, and you just keep hearing this. At each instrument, you can tease out what they're playing. I mean, if you're a bass guitarist, you'll listen to the guitarist, and you'll think, oh yeah, that's a nice lick. Each one of them plays, none of them play the same lick at the same time. They each, because they're at such a height of their profession, each one of them plays a different lick in each bar. So, it's like, at that point, suddenly you're thinking, I can hear that. I can hear the guitarist. Bernard Purdie, the drum. But you listen to something like Jerry Jamot, who's the bass player, and you can hear each bass line that he's playing and each one that he's vamping on, which is sensational, amid this maelstrom of music. And that's really what you're listening to when you're trying to determine sound staging. And in a lot of systems, what you'll find, as I said, I'm at a bit of a disadvantage here because the system's so damn good that I can't sit there and say, oh yeah, you hear it shut down. You won't. It doesn't close up. It doesn't blur into one another because the system's so good. So it gives you an idea of kind of what we're looking for there. One thing we haven't talked about a lot is we've mentioned dynamics in terms of piano, but I think actually what we really, when it comes to it, it's always orchestral pieces that have that big dynamic swing. And this is probably the nearest to get to what it is kind of an audiophile recording. It's a reference recording one of Rachmaninoff's symphonic dances. I generally wouldn't use something like this because it is very audiophile, but the advantage to it is it rattles along at a good pace, and you don't have to sit there and listen to 20 minutes of introduction before you get there. One of the ones I often play is a overture to Gilbert and Sullivan's Pirates of Penzance, which I've got an old Decca version of, which is beautiful. But you'd have to sit there and listen for 8 minutes while I'm going, oh, this piece and this little tinkly bit and this. Whereas this kicks off pretty quickly, and we might as well just, so you can play it and hear from there. The usual thing would be with this that I would prepare and get a huge set of very high quality. I mean, this is available on, I think it's on SACD. Get a huge set of things in advance. I've technically been, I've been out and about. I was in Denmark earlier this week, and I'm technically away on holiday for a while. So it's been a very last minute thing. I sent everyone the playlist a little late, so I'm actually streaming this off a phone. So it gives you an idea of just exactly what this system can do. This is running at a fraction of these tracks. You would hear them even better were they being played through. So this is already, this is how good these systems can be. That's running off my phone. So just to give you an idea, but as I said, going back to the music itself, this is something that we would normally, I wouldn't necessarily play symphonic dances. It's one of those kind of audiophile standards, but it does give an idea of what the system can do in terms of dynamics at speed, because it bounces along like a crazy thing, which is kind of why it's been an audiophile recording. It's why it's been a demonstration disc for the longest time. One of the things that I try to listen, this is specific to loudspeakers, and it ain't going to work in this because it's going to sound excellent. But one of the things that we tend to find is that when you're dealing with a ported loudspeaker, and then I'm at a disadvantage because these aren't ported loudspeakers, but when you are listening to a ported loudspeaker in the main, one of the problems that you get is when you're dealing with very deep bass notes and very quick electronica notes, sometimes they will choke up in the port. So what you tend to hear is you should hear these kind of fast, deep notes. And what you tend to hear is them go blum, 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 because they don't quite address quick enough. And it's a unique thing that doesn't necessarily, you can't necessarily hear it if you're listening to classical or jazz or whatever. But what we can find sometimes is that people will invest in a system based on listening to very nice, polite, audiophile jazz music and everything else, and then they go back home and think, oh, I just want to play some techno. And when they do, it doesn't sound as good. So we do include something of that kind of electronica. Now, this one's, the usual one I play, I think, is a Trent Moller track, but I decided to sort of change it up a bit. And this is an album of outtakes and remixes by Björk called Bastards. And this is probably not with the same intensity of Bastards, but anyway, this is a track called Hollow, and I'm just going to play some early part of it. So she's nuts, basically. She's properly nuts, but it's a very fine track for assessing bits. It gets a bit crazy as it goes on. There's a couple of other ones. There's lots of people who, the very good people who are doing this kind of mixing are exceptional at this, and those incredibly deep notes rarely exist in nature. Yes, you get organ, sort of 64-foot organs, but that has a slow attack and decay, whereas when you've got something that's basically a synthesizer, you might get a note that is almost like a square wave. It just hits you, one big, and if you get repeated notes like that with some systems, and this isn't doing it, notably, that kind of, that bass note chokes up, and it can be quite noticeable. Once you hear it in something, it becomes immediately apparent. We've kind of covered all the bases there, but one of the things that and I don't like talking about this, holding to this in a way, because there's this idea that loudspeakers are good for particular types of music. It's nonsense. There's no filter in a loudspeaker. There's, oh, I'm okay, I'm good for classical music. I think what tends to happen is that you're listening to the compromises in a system and you're building those to make something where you think, oh, that works really well with classical music. When you've got Again, at a disadvantage. When you've got a system that doesn't have those compromises, it'll play everything. But what we do try to do is to play different pieces of music from different genres to try and determine whether that sort of holds, because the compromises fit one particular type of music well or not.